Karen.
So I guess today, the purpose of today's meeting is really just to check in to see how everybody's making out with their sections of the report, and if they need help or give us like a summary of how far they've gotten. Aisha, can you display the document showing who has what? Thank you.
See that? You need me to make it larger?
A little bigger would be helpful, I think.
Oh,
Thank you. I just need to move it over a little. Thanks. Yeah, that's better. So the introduction is DEP's responsibility. We have started it. It's short and easy. We can share it with the group in a separate email so everybody can take a look at it. Background is Dunbar, Lyle, and Chris. So how you guys make it out?
Well, so let me step in first. We don't, as far as I know, have any text drafted, but are continuing with research. One thing that I tracked down, I think at last meeting there was mention that there was some kind of report out of ASU related to reuse of panels. And so I've dug into that, and there's a professor named Meng Tao in electrical engineering there, and he has received SBIR funding through NSF to do, essentially it's more of a chemical digestion and disassembly. I don't think that the SBIR has yielded a successful commercial venture. It's sort of exploratory, and so I don't think it's different than things that we've been testing as ideas, and so it's not going to solve all our problems. I could show his website, or I mean, there is a company website that he has founded, but it really isn't overwhelming. And so that isn't very helpful, but at least it's tying off that loose end. The other thing that I did, and I know Lyle had already downloaded the Office of Clean Energy New Jersey equipment database, and so I tracked that down as well, and I did a quick, maybe Lyle had done this kind of in the background when we were in a meeting before, but I added up all of the First Solar project data and then compared that number to the full entire state installs, and there's less than 1% that's First Solar. It's, according to my calculation, 0.7%. And so as far as I know, that's the only company with the CADTEL sort of different toxicity parameters. And so if we're making a program, we should aim for silicon and solving that. And if we had to put CADTEL completely in toxic waste of some other category, it's a small fraction. So I don't know. That's all I have to report. Maybe Lyle has more info from that data set.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, that data set is going to be a rich data set along with the installation data set that comes out of BPU. I did run those calculations fairly detailed about First Solar, how much has been installed and when, in what year in New Jersey and by whom, so that we can, perhaps consider whether the owners, what responsibilities lie with the owners as well as from potentially other parties. And by the way, PSE&G was the largest a developer of First Solar projects. And so they would undoubtedly need to be part of that conversation at some point. And knowing PSE&G, they probably already have a plan, I would guess. Another thing that I think should be done, and I can get the ball rolling on this, is to talk to First Solar about their position on what are the best end of life options and any quantification they have of risk. You know, I know that as long as the modules stay encapsulated, there's extremely low risk of any leaching of cadmium into the environment. So that's something that I think we should have a fuller explanation from them that I can start to pursue. I think the guys I knew there are no longer with the company, so I'm going to have to kind of start from scratch to get to the right people. But more generally, the data that is described here that we want to characterize is, you know, aside from cadmium telluride in particular, what about the mainstream silicon modules? And I've started work on a thorough characterization of how much was installed when, and how does that translate into when those are likely to reach end of life. And based on the discussions we have had, I've realized that rather than pick one specific lifetime that's an expected lifetime for modules, that there's more of a spectrum where there is this incidence of modules ending their life earlier than expected. And so I think for each installation of modules, we have to have a histogram of when the expected end of life is for a particular installation. I don't want it to get to the point where the calculation is incredibly unwieldy, because it's going to be tough enough as it is. But I've started that, and that histogram of, you know, for a particular installation, what percentage of them is going to end up being removed during particular time periods from that time forward to the expected end of life is necessarily a guess. I cannot find any source of information that would give us a solid histogram, you know, for when once you know, an installation is in the ground, what percentage of them reach end of life at different periods of time. I think we just have to take a reasonable guess. And Dunbar, I apologize for not having coordinated with you more before this, but I'd like to see if I could propose, you know, just a estimated histogram for any particular one, and see if we can get consensus around it, around something reasonable. I think that's the best we can do. And then it'll be a matter of going to each year of the program, going back to the year 2000 and forward to today, for how much has been installed on each given year, and then apply that histogram to each year, add it all up, and that should what pops out at the end should be how many modules or how many kilowatts can we expect every year from now going forward. And then the second part of that is going to be, we have to project how many new systems will be in the ground from this point forward, and do the same thing with those. So I've got that underway. I was on vacation for a couple of weeks, Dunbar, so I wasn't avoiding you, but
So
yeah,
I like the idea of the distribution, because certainly that's how failures happen. And you know, it's in a randomized way, and so I don't know, maybe we should, is there time later this week that you and I can get together and
yeah,
and take that another step further? Because
sure,
May I offer a suggestion to you?
yeah,
It
sure.
sounds like sounds like what you're talking about when taking these numbers that you already know about from the spreadsheets and databases that you have and trying to predict a future trend that actually can be performed inside of Excel. It's called a scenario and forecasting. If you guys get the metrics, if you know the metrics, I could help you with that. I could build it for you and we could forecast it and say if this trend continues at this rate in this amount of years, this is what we'd be looking at. This is what, but I don't know what's the metrics to input for that. But Excel does have that function to do scenarios and forecasting if you guys could nail the metrics for what to input the formulas to. But I can help you with that.
Well, I would definitely welcome the help. And another thing that I could use some help with is this is going to end up being an enormous table of numbers. I'm a sort of an Excel nerd. I have no problem, handling all the numbers and crunching numbers, but definitely welcome to help on that, Ashia. Where I could particularly use help, where I'm not as talented as some others might be, is translating all that data into the graphs, because in the report, nobody's going to want to look at, huge tables of numbers. We can have some summary tables that I think would be valuable, but translating that into some graphs for policymakers, the visuals are going to be a lot better. And that's where I'm probably not as strong at making.
I can help with that. Excel have that function built in. I might can play around with it and see how I can assist you with that. I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can do graphs, but making them attractive and say what you want to say clearly and impactfully, I definitely could use some help with that.
Thinking about the sort of statistical lifetimes, there might be some, and I don't know if Chris is on with us today, but he had talked about the failures in the petrosolar light pole installations, maybe from car accidents or whatever. You might think that population might have a different statistics than if it was on a commercial landfill kind of installation. So interesting to think about.
Yeah,
he might have actual numbers. He probably has actual numbers on the rate at which those are coming out, and so might be able to parameterize us.
Oh, you mean the PSC&G member of this committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, they keep really good records on that program, so I bet they do have some really good stuff there. I was just doing some quick math. That program, the Solar for All, Solar on Poles program is a little over 1% of all the solar that's gone on, so it is a significant amount. Not enough to change the overall numbers a huge amount, but it would certainly be interesting.
Yeah, he gave us exact numbers on how many panels they lose every other month.
Yeah.
And it was astonishing.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
So I don't know, Lyle, what the rest of the week looks like for you, but maybe Thursday or Friday, something like that. We can just trade emails and set that up.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we can make that happen.
Yeah, Chris is not joining us today. He was unable to make it.
Okay.
All right. Well, this sounds like you've started to drill down, and I guess now that the summer is winding down, vacation season will be over, and hopefully that will allow people a little more time to focus. Joe was supposed to be on the call, but I don't think he is he, Aisha?
Joe, are you there?
He's here. Microsoft Teams always fights me, so I have to be on by phone.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little handicapped. I've been able to see the slides that he's been putting on, but I can only tell you that I'm delving into the leasing issue. I'm treating it as since I lack any real supply of representative leases, that the industry uses. I'm using the association leases as models, but I think the the guide on ownership issues relating whether or not they impact um, end of life and use recyclability, addressing that. Ownership issues are very complex in equipment leases. They're litigated a lot because of the difference between a financing lease and a true lease. I'm not sure that the ownership issue has a bearing on recyclability, but the players do vary because there's a great deal of third-party financing, and there's a great deal of tax benefit ownership structures that's associated with solar leases. So that whole area, I'm beginning to try to pull together some meaningful descriptions and see if they do have a bearing on recyclability. Right now, it doesn't appear that there is a clear-cut relationship between ownership and recyclability.
Mhm. Yeah, perhaps not ownership and recyclability, but ownership and responsibility. I think there's going to be a clear tie because basically the owner of the system is going to be the presumptive default party responsible for their disposal. It belongs to them, so disposing of them is that owner's responsibility, and that's going to be an interesting question as well. Um, if regulation of that disposal at end of life were to become something very, very expensive and not anticipated by the owners, that could be quite a train wreck, and one that eventually would have to be grappled with.
That's true, and the question then becomes when those, if it becomes difficult, if it becomes expensive, what impact does that have on the relationship between the lessor and the lessees? And it seems to be mainly that seems to be the dominant model.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, just a comment on that. In actuality, the dominant model is a third-party ownership model, but the lease is a minority of the time. It's more often out-and-out direct investment and direct ownership by the third-party person, and so it's pretty unambiguous. Then, in that case, the lease is usually the system owner is simply leasing the property upon which to put the solar facility. Other than that, the host site really doesn't have any involvement. So in those cases, it's going to be very unambiguous that the third party owner is going to be the responsible party, and that's probably between 60 and 70%. It's declining slightly over time, but then the other 30 to 40% is direct ownership by the site owner. And again, the responsibility is going to be unambiguous. And by the way, that's different whether in the commercial world versus the residential world. In the residential world, the percentage of direct ownership is higher. It's more like 40 to 50 in that case. And again,
Lyle,
so,
let me
yeah.
ask a question about that, because I could see this sort of commercial scale, third party owned, leasing a piece of land. That owner is more likely to be carefully monitoring their array performance over time, right? And so
That's true.
that may be under a subscription, or they may do it well themselves. But in most cases, that provides an indication of when an inverter might need to be replaced if it fails, or maybe if modules fail, how to track down and replace those. And so I don't know if there's a a company that does that might be able to give us some insight into if they're monitoring a megawatt, how often do they need to go in and replace a module? Or, I mean, there might be a way to get some numbers through a service contractor like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, since that's the business I'm engaged in, I think I can provide some of that information. And
Okay.
anecdotally, I can tell you that we're still in the early years in the lifetime of most of these systems. And, our experience has been very few of the modules get replaced. But we're just now coming up on 15 to 20 years on some pretty large numbers of modules, and so we'll see. And already we've seen a couple of systems where either the host site or the owner is interested in removing or repowering a system. And just recently, I mean, this is just in the last 2 days, I've heard industry folk in general start to talk about repowering systems as an opportunity. And that may be true, but in the same way that it's an opportunity for industry folk, it's a problem for us in terms of recycling, because if they decide to repower early and can make an economic case for that, it would mean much larger amounts of modules coming off end of life sooner. So I think we'll have to take an interest in that question and perhaps see what can be done about discouraging that practice.
Well, and so this is sort of a topic that I thought the ASU report would have covered, but it obviously went a different direction. But imagining that repowering where your whole array, the modules were an older generation, not quite as efficient, and then degrading a little bit with time. When those are taken out of service, they're not dead. And so I had thought that there was a company or a service that was going to try and patch them together into a useful array, lower power, but useful still. And so I don't know, without any report to read, then my imagination was running about how you would maybe have to do an IV trace for every module you had, and then you'd have to match them to make any sensible strings and figure out voltages that you'd be operating at. But they would have value, right? If that labor wasn't too overwhelming in terms of testing. So that's
Well, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago on one of these calls, and that was before I went on vacation for a couple of weeks. It's the first time in 12 years, by the way, so don't beat me up over it. But first vacation. But anyway, I think I briefly mentioned that 2 of the Mid-Atlantic SIA members are interested in speaking with the commission. Perhaps they could come on a call as a guest speaker. One of which is a member of our board and actually the president of the PA SIA division of ours. And he has been looking into reusing modules that come off of other projects that are repowered or for any other reason, and thinks that that's an important possible way of avoiding recycling or landfilling modules. And he's got some both experience working on such projects and some thoughts about how it could happen. So if there's interest, I could bring him on. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I mean, even with that though, as great as that would be I mean, none of the modules that would last indefinitely. I mean, you'd be significantly expanding the lifespan and all of that, but I mean, eventually they would still have to get recycled, right? Like, I'm not missing something, am I?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. This is more preventing early end of life is what that play is about. Now, interestingly, I mean, one of the things that this person, Ron Celentano, has been working on is getting those to low income areas and possibly even overseas to places like Africa that have a huge need, and this could go to other developing countries as well, and providing sorely needed services in those places.
Can I ask the question aloud? You there? Uh-oh. Did I lose you guys?
We can hear you.
No,
Okay.
from me.
I'm trying to understand when you use the term repower, what exactly do you mean by repower? Is this something that's done to a solar module that's not depleted yet, or is it of a lower power and you bring the power back up? Like, what does the term repower mean?
Well, maybe
think
Lyle's
Lyle's
frozen, but I
frozen.
think, but essentially it means reinstalling new panels on the existing racks. So they would be, so you'd power down, take them out, put in new ones, and you probably would have to put in different inverters too, because your power would be higher. But it's essentially a full rebuild, I would say.
Like building the module over, not like injecting fresh power. I'm sorry for my ignorance. It's not injecting fresh power into it. Like if my motherboard needs more RAM and I just put more RAM in, it's not nothing like that, right?
No, it would just be a
Okay.
swap out.
Oh,
But the I guess in the installer world they're calling that as a repower, but it
okay.
is a redo.
It's like
It
complete.
really is replacing the old
Okay.
panels with newer, more modern, more efficient panels.
Okay.
And originally, it's my understanding there wasn't a lot of interest in that because the initial installation of the original panels was very expensive and therefore a huge investment. So people would want to try and use that for as long as the panels operated. But now apparently there is a very recent trend, or at least discussion, about replacing older panels with these better, newer panels. And that could cause timeline by which we need to start recycling these panels to accelerate.
Okay.
Unless there is an alternative of reusing these older panels in situations where maybe people couldn't afford the newer, more expensive versions, or sending them to nonprofits or developing nations or something like that, which would again delay the need for end of life management.
Okay.
This topic of reusing the solar panels is being explored at the October conference that NERC is putting on.
Oh, yeah?
You on? Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Northeast Recycling Council is at their October conference. Is going to be exploring the reusing of solar panels. And there is a gentleman from Massachusetts, I believe he was a former state DEP official, who has explored the concept in some depth. And he's identified some obstacles, principally the lack of ethical norms and labeling reused panels and standards that would apply to them. And there is some industry pushback in terms of the competition that using reused panels would have on new installation capabilities. So it's a very important topic, and it's one that is just getting exposure, and it's something that needs a good deal of attention. I think all the points that have been raised thus far are all very relevant about markets for reusing and how you do it. I had a discussion with some folks on it who represent third-party financial groups, and I raised the question of whether or not reusing would be an attractive potential for aggregating these panels and somehow syndicating them for financing purposes. And one of the tax lawyers, well, you can't get any tax benefits on used equipment. So that's that would be an obstacle toward securitizing large quantities of reused or formerly, reusing solar panels. But it's a very important topic. I think it's got some tremendous potential.
Maybe we should just make a mandate that all of the bad panels just get repowered.
Pardon me?
Maybe we should just make a mandate that all of those bad CADTEL and First Solars just get repowered.
And have a rebate
So,
program.
I mean, I think
Whether
incentivize.
industry is a electric energy industry term, meaning take a power plant, in this case the solar power plant, and bring in new equipment to the same site, and that's what's called repowering. So unfortunately, it's kind of the opposite of
what I think it
extending
is.
the life of modules. It actually shortens the life of modules instead and brings in new ones. I'm sorry I dropped off. Something happened with the network, and I was unable to get back in. So I
Totally
called
understand.
in my telephone.
No problem. Thank you.
I was about to conclude that we have another member who's only been in business in New Jersey for a couple of years, but he's already been asked by several customers, he said, to remove modules and take them away when they either shut down the system or repowered the same system. And he was interested in just recounting his experiences and what he has faced in trying to properly dispose of those modules. And I think he's interested in learning for himself and others in our community what options there are today that our commission may have uncovered or suggested. So those two guys are willing to come on and talk if there's interest in them doing so.
Yeah, I think that would be really enlightening and helpful to the commission. So if you could supply Aisha with their contact information, we could reach out to them and try and choose a date that is convenient for them.
so.
Yep.
So
Okay.
thinking about this idea of taking the still working but removed for a repower upgrade, the older ones still need the same amount of racking. So there's a lot of balance of system kinds of costs that might still make it attractive to get the newer panels. And so the market for these in a reuse mode is kind of questionable.
Limited. Yeah, no doubt about it. And there are other issues that would be difficult to overcome. And in New Jersey, in particular, it's labor. We've been asked to provide quotes. My own company has been asked to provide quotes for removing systems that were malfunctioning and replacing them with new modules. Or there's been a couple of cases where the host site no longer wanted to be a host site. And so the question is, can you remove the modules, move them somewhere else, sometimes very close by, and set them up again? And labor has been the issue. And the second big cost issue is transportation, shipping from one place to another, packing and shipping and unpacking is expensive too. So don't want to sugarcoat it. It's a very challenging proposition, but I don't think the industry has given up on it by any means.
Right. You could scroll down, Aisha. So the next topic that was assigned is current and developing recycling technologies. So Stephanie, how are you making out with that section?
So unfortunately, I missed the last meeting, so I didn't have the assignments, but I will start working on it right away.
Okay. So DEP is working on under the current approaches, what we're doing here in New Jersey and what we're doing in California. Chris is not here. Sean, how are you making out with North Carolina?
No problem with North Carolina because of a bill that required a study be done and also has a deadline for adopting regulations, which is next year. So basically, it's the report that was issued. Illinois is the problem, not the problem, the challenge, because there is no legislative appetite for a law, for a statute. So it's a matter of what the where am I? It's what the college is doing with their working group to come up with their working paper that I spoke about at our last meeting. It hasn't come out yet, so I'm waiting for that.
Do you have a sense of when that will be released?
Based on a conversation, they said August, as I indicated at the last meeting. However, I've been checking their website, and I know it's only the 16th, but I don't think it's, well, but we'll see. I'll keep checking, and I'm hoping that'll be, they said August. We're in August, so we'll see.
Okay, Dave's not here. So these are kind of part of other sections that as you write your section, you will kind of be doing this evaluation to see. And then we need to get together and compare. Joe, you specifically expressed an interest in exploring a landfill ban or a incentive program. Did you make any headway on that?
What models there are. As landfill bans have been used, the repercussions used. Obviously, they depend on some infrastructure being in place, and I think that they tend to be pretty draconian. In this context, I think they would be, but I think that's probably the real challenge to implement that. It would have to be probably over a period of time.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been hearing from some members of the commission that a landfill ban is, they feel that it's the way to go. We know in the e-waste world that it seems anyway, that states that have a landfill ban have a more robust e-waste recycling program than those who do not. That may be oversimplifying it, but generally that's the feedback we have been getting. So I'm not sure what kind of pushback we would get because, as Joe suggested, although I had a little bit of hard time understanding Joe, that it could be viewed as draconian.
Well, one of the problems with banning is to encourage illicit dumping
Yeah.
on any commodity, and that would, to me, that would be a big concern without having the infrastructure in place.
Right. You'd have to have the program built
That's been
before
the
you could ban it.
Tires, it's been the problem with a lot of unwanted commodities that have, large tonnages, quantities. So I think the landfill ban has got to be carefully orchestrated. Otherwise, it's going to have some unintended consequences. I think making it more expensive to do it might be a better way than banning it. But that's all part of the incentive program. Mandate or provide incentive to make it expensive to show up with panels, and then provide the disposal operator with some monetary incentive to either install some recycling technology or do other types of remediation. But the ban is tough. I think the ban is tough. But to me, it's the ultimate weapon, yeah, but it's something that you use carefully.
Right. I think as regulators, we have learned over time that the carrot and the stick approach works better than just the stick. And so some kind of incentive with some consequence if things aren't done in accordance with the rules or the intent of the rules. All right. What else is
on? What Lyle said about responsibility for disposal, where that tracks the owner or the installer. Right now, I'm not sure that that's addressed at all in the context of the leases that I've seen. If it's a typical lease, at the end of the term, it goes back to the lessor. If it's a traditional lease, if it's a financing lease, then at the end of the term, the owner, the user, gets to buy it for nominal value. It's basically he's the owner, even though he's leasing it over a period of time. So I don't see that in any of the leases that I've reviewed that a responsibility for disposal falls on is addressed at all, or whether the costs are put into the equation. Lyle, is that something that you understand is part of the negotiations of these leases?
I don't know if Lyle, you there? He was on the phone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was able to get back in on the Microsoft Teams meeting, but I was on mute there, so sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, the vast majority of the third-party ownership models that I've encountered are power purchase agreements in which there's either an embedded lease of the property or a separate lease for the property. The PPA is essentially the governing document, and typically there are end of term options that would include the host site buying the facility. And if that doesn't happen, typically the system owner is responsible to remove the system from the site and restore the site to its previous condition. So that's the typical contractual terms.
That's a typical equipment lease, and not a financing lease, where the
well, it's neither one. Nobody is leasing the equipment. The only lease is a property lease. You're leasing the property on which you're going to build the solar system, but you are the straight up owner of the facility. There's no equipment lease involved, in other words. So it's just a PPA, yeah, just a power purchase agreement. Yep, and the power purchase agreement.
Opposed to a regular lease of the equipment.
Yeah, I mean those exist, but it's a small minority of the systems out there, so far as I know.
Where the site owner owns the equipment itself.
Well, the site owner owning the equipment outright, just paying for it outright, is in large commercial systems is 30%, 35%, and verging upwards slightly, but in the past and going on into the future, it would be between 30 and 40% would be direct ownership by the site owner.
All right. Is there anything more on the, or do we go to Jim?
It's just 2 more bullets, I believe, and I don't think they have any one-on-one now. Oh wait, yeah, there is more.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
This last one is all DP.
Right.
Yep, that's the end.
Okay, let's get a report from Jim. Did he send us something, Aisha?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Jim, are you there still?
Jim?
Yes, Jim is here.
Okay. I was hoping you could give us a summary of what you have found so far.
Yeah, I think it's important, just a couple of things. I sent a document, and Asia, if you want to, and Karen, if you want to share that with the group, please feel free to do that, which was, because of my background with e-waste, just some thoughts on the program framework. I know it was just mentioned about the landfill ban. I think it's critical that you have a landfill ban in order to keep those out of there. If there's some way to do an incentive for the landfills themselves, I mean, obviously that's a consideration. In the document itself, I put together that there needs to be some kind of a structure or a network of depots to do the collection and the aggregation throughout the state to collect the panels. These depots should be convenient. They should be centralized locations. Another thing that I think is important is the depot itself, or the people operating the depot, should have some level of collection capabilities, meaning that they have pickup services, offered to clients or manufacturers and installers. Because some of the people doing the installs and reinstalls don't necessarily have the capability or have the desire to do the movement of the product. So I think it's important that the depots have that ability. Then some type of requirement established for installers to utilize the depot network. I guess that's the whole carrot and the stick that you guys were mentioned before. And I also think it's a natural for, who will qualify as a depot, is a note I have here, and that's utilization of the existing infrastructure. We're an NJDP licensed Class B facility. I think it's a natural to add solar panels to this. It's a hot topic in the e-waste world. I'm going to the conferences coming up in the fall, and solar panels are a hot topic to be added to the different qualifications and requirements and certifications. So I think it's important to continue utilizing the existing sites Class C sites that are handling e-waste to just pull, this product in there and keep it simple. As far as downstream processing of materials, I think it's important that, each depot will, designate a downstream or approved downstream facility to process the material. I think right now on the economic side of it, I don't think it makes sense for, to set up a whole facility to do this in the state. I have personally not done enough research. We at one point had had a machine that did the cutting of CRT tubes and the separation of the glass. It's a very costly piece of equipment. I think the better way to go is utilize, some of these people that have spoken to us on these past calls, whether it's CADTEL or the people down in Texas. The big factor, and I think that this is going to need more discussion, is the funding of the recycling. I'm hearing things about leases, end of life, who's responsible for the equipment, who's going to be handling it. A major factor in the e-waste world is, when these things roll out, who's going to pay for the recycling of them. I think that is a critical factor that we're going to have some level of discussion on, and establishing the fee itself. In the document that I provided to Asia and Karen, I also put in components for the fee, because I think it was Lyle mentioned about packaging. Packaging of this equipment is a factor. Things like receiving and the data collection, the handling and the sorting, because there's so many different types. Of course, the packaging I just mentioned, the storage and aggregation, because, it would be a beautiful thing to think that you're just going to get a load, ship it out to the downstream. It doesn't work that way. Of course, you have cost for the space. And Lyle, I think, mentioned this freight. Moving this product around is going to be very expensive. Freight is off the wall right now in all of my businesses. Then, of course, the processing charge for the downstreams, and then, I'm sure the GDPs want to report back. So, Asia and Karen, if you guys want to share that document with the group, there are blanks, there are holes in there that need to be filled in, but I just thought it was important to get an e-waste person's perspective on setting up a system that I think could work. New Tech is willing to be a test facility and help in any way.
If I just had a question or a comment, and thank you, because since I work in e-waste for DEP, this is Dan. I know I'm realizing you can't see me. That this is sparking a lot of things, but one of those, I guess if anyone can answer this, but and this, hadn't necessarily occurred to me in such explicit terms until it was just said, but I guess with solar panels, or modules, that a lot of them are probably big enough, right, that, your average person would have trouble, even assuming that you could safely get them off the top of your house, for example. Let's even start there, that you were able to get them off the top of your house safely, that a lot of them are not units that you could easily, chuck in the back of your Civic or something, right? Is that fair? Is that an accurate thing to say? That, I guess as we're considering this, that this issue of not only how they'll be handled, but in terms of getting solar panels from, someone's house to wherever they go, that's an important consideration, because this is not I guess sort of drawing a parallel to e-waste, I know one of the things that we often have issues with, that I get resident calls or emails about, is people who have, the big screen TVs, or even the older like CRT TVs, that, they, don't easily fit in your car or whatever. And, we have to schedule people for pickups or anything. So yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is it fair to say that most solar panels, most of these modules, even assuming you could, leaving aside the part where they need to be detached from a house or a building or whatever, that this is not something that would be easy just to throw in your car and bring somewhere. Is that fair?
I would say 100% fair. And that's why I made the comment about the locations, the depot locations or the collection site need to have the ability to offer the service, or even let's see, I'm going to use Lyle's group. These installers, it could be a valuated service to them to offer the, not only the removal, let's say, off a roof, but then the delivery of that to a depot or, like a recycling center for that client. Because Dan, you're 100% correct. We like for Ewan's, we're a depot. Our site is a depot, and we watch people struggle to try to get these TVs out of their cars, or at a collection event. We unload the cars, but it is a real concern to be able to handle the product. As I get more and more familiar with it, it's a big part of this journey is how to handle the product, move the product, and handle the product safely.
So to give you an idea about the weight and size, so a typical module might be a meter wide by 1.6 or maybe 3 feet by 5 feet, and might weigh 60 pounds or so, 70, 50, 60, something like that.
It's about right.
So if you imagine getting up on a ladder trying to detach one from the roof, you're going to the hospital.
Yeah.
Well, you need a crew to do something
That's
like
right.
that. They have to be tied off, proper safety harnesses and the whole bit in order to do that kind of work, and they have to know what they're doing. So, yeah, it's going to have to be by commercial enterprises that do that for a fee. And by the way, I have to drop off now for another meeting. I'm sorry about that, but I've got to go, and I'm looking forward to next time, everybody.
Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Lyle.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll give you a call, Dunbar.
Great.
If I could just take up another minute of our time with this too. I mean, I guess even, my other thought too is then, I know in e-waste, like a lot of the municipalities or counties run programs where, the first Wednesday of the month or whatever is PV day.
Yes.
Something along those lines, the same with bulk goods and whatever. But I mean, the other thing that just occurred to me too is that with these, I mean, one, if they're hazardous, clearly, the less contact, the fewer people, especially people who are, unqualified, the public are having with these, the better. You don't want everyone handling them, but also too, I mean, my assumption would be that however they would be handled in order to make them like economically recoverable or useful, that if you had somebody who didn't know what they were doing handling solar panels, they'd be more likely to damage them in a way that would make them less valuable, that you'd be cracking them or knocking them around. Is that also?
I think that's absolutely right. And so you could imagine in the way Lyle was describing safety and efficacy for getting things off your roof. If you were a company that specialized in that, you would probably learn how to do it effectively with as little labor as possible. So it might be different than the installer. You'd have installer companies, but then there might be a handful of companies who specialize in removal. And like you say, they would know how to protect the panel from being broken and then susceptible to leaching out whatever might be in there. And even if there were a possible reuse, they'd be trained enough to get it to the right place. So those are all really sensible.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to you, Dan. I'm thinking if I don't have solar panels, if I were to get them, do I get a manual? Do I have a document that tells me what to do in the event of, something crashing into a panel? I mean, it's going to tell me, do not go up on the roof because they're heavy. Or like, what do you get as a leasee if you don't own the panels?
That's a good question.
Well, so I think that most of the time you get some assurance that it's not going to fail, but then sometimes it will, and you're very likely to call up the same installer who installed it and say, "Help! I need to get this one repaired," and then you'd get a quote on what that work would be. But it probably isn't I don't even know if there's insurance built into what the, for those kinds of failures. So those are good questions.
So I don't know whether you were done, Dan, but you're raising a lot of interesting questions that, a homeowner isn't going to do this and be taking it to the public works.
Nope, they're gonna dump it in the woods.
No, don't say that. Don't say that.
Well, I mean, it's probably a lot like what you would do when you need a new furnace or a new hot water heater. You hire someone, you might get some quotes, probably, but you wouldn't do it yourself. But I think that many systems now have some kind of a dashboard, so you know how much people get excited about what solar they're generating from an array that's on their house. And so they'll have on their phone a little app that shows the generated per hour. And so if it fails, then probably there's, a service call charge for whatever needs to be done. But and as we were talking about these things too, the commercial sized ones, and Lyle's not on anymore, but those owners and operators are going to be different than our residential ones too. So.
Right.
And if I can I make a comment about reuse?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I don't know. Yeah, we always say in recycling, especially electronics, the best form of recycling is reuse. I don't know enough about the panels themselves and how complex and how hard it is to reuse them. The challenge is sometimes, or at least what's happening in the electronic industry, is that reuse evolves. And I have a feeling that it's going to evolve over time. And it sounds from Lyle's comment with that member that people are starting to think about it, think about options. I think that the depots should be able to help facilitate the reuse. Like my first thought when I get equipment in is reuse. There's another factor too, though. Always to consider that I get a lot of equipment in that can be reused that is designated for end of life, and that's it. So there's always a couple of sides to the story where people have acquired to recycle their equipment and not resell their equipment or reuse their equipment. I have a feeling that the same is going to be said for solar panels, at least on the commercial side. For something to think about. And reuse also, with reuse, at times it does become a glut. Everybody always says, well, I'd like to donate my equipment. I'd like to, send it to a charity or a non-for-profit. Those non-for-profits tend to have the best of the best equipment because everybody's trying to donate to them, which is a great thing. But everybody needs to understand that there are challenges with that as well.
All right, so I think everybody has reported out. We did mention last meeting that we were hoping that people would have drafts by next meeting. Again, it can be very rough drafts. I think when we start putting pen to paper, it may be more apparent where we need help, what holes and gaps need to be filled, and we can ask for help from other members at that time. There's, some uncovered sections on this outline that we have. I'm not sure that they need to be covered as separate sections in the final report. I'm thinking that perhaps the funding question gets answered when we decide what our recommendation is. I know that we can probably eliminate some options as being, cost prohibitive right off the bat. And so we don't need to do that analysis, that evaluation. But when we decide on what our recommendation is, or recommendations, then I think it is the appropriate time to start looking at the funding mechanism for that particular recommendation, rather than spending a lot of time looking into funding options that we can't consider off the bat.
It's like figuring out what price we're going to pay for the software, and we don't know what software we need yet.
Right. So, there's, like I said, some sections here not assigned yet, and that's fine. So I think, again, once we have the rough drafts of each section and we start putting it together, I'm hoping that our recommendation or recommendations become clearer, and then we can start assembling a report in a more cohesive way and then filling in the blanks from there. We are happy to assemble what pieces that you provide, but I think at next meeting, like I said, if you can have a draft in whatever form you can have it, would be appreciated. And then maybe we can share the screens and start taking a look at it. And the author can walk us through what their thinking is, and again, where there are gaps and holes that need to be filled. Also, in the meantime, Aisha will reach out to those guest speakers to see if they are available for the September meeting or the October meeting. And that might be nice to kind of break up the report discussion.
So it seemed like Lyle had two names, and he's off now, but if you emailed him, he could probably get those names and contacts back quickly.
I will.
Thank you. All right, does anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about today? Well, thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of the summer.
What's the date, Karen, for the next meeting?
We can do the 13th of September or September 20th. 4 weeks from today will be September 13th. 5 weeks will be September 20th.
Is anybody back in class that either one of those doesn't work for or have a conflict for the meeting? I am inclined to go to the later date to give people a little bit more time to start drafting their sections.
So I last semester I had a conflict that made us push it to the later time, 1:30 instead of 1. This time my teaching schedule starts at 3 and goes after, so we may want to go back to the 1 o'clock time, and or I'll just have to, something like that sounds good to me. But I do teach at 3 every Monday.
12:30 to 2:30.
Does that work for folks?
On September 20th?
Yes.
That's fine for me.
Okay. September 20th, 12:30 to 2:30.
All right, sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks again. Take care.
Hear from you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.